In his inaugural speech as the 9th Prime Minister of Malaysia, Dato Sri Ismail Sabri referred to his fellow citizens as Keluarga Malaysia. Let's just run with this for a moment. An average household in Malaysia might have about 4 people. Each of these family members have their own wants and needs. Typically, the parents, or the heads of the household, are responsible for providing for the family and managing their finances. To deal with this, many households draw their own budgets, covering groceries, bills, school fees, even how many holidays to take. As these decisions affect everyone in the household, it's important to have discussions with each person and consider their individual needs. Now imagine that household having 32.7 million family members. Put simply, our annual federal budget is meant to function in a similar way, but with much higher stakes, since it involves the needs of all 32.7 million of us. And just like a household budget, we all have a stake in the outcome. And each decision that the government makes will have an impact on our lives. Sounds pretty serious, right? But then every year when November comes around and the budget is announced, we get a lot of this instead.
Yang berhormat, Yang berhormat. Kenapa ni?
Democracy.
In a way, it's also a political statement, right? The way you spend the money is represent of what your political stand. I don't think it's bad. In fact, that's where check and balance is happening, right?
This is Sri Munyati, also known as Uni. She is a senior manager at the Public Finance Unit of Ideas, a non-partisan think tank that aims to help improve policy-making decisions with the hopes of making Malaysia a better, more inclusive place.
The task of every government is to make the citizens' life better, ensure equitable development, equal opportunities for every citizen. So budget is ideally a tool that the government uses to achieve policy objectives. How do we allocate budget so that education system is better, schools have qualities, those who are vulnerable groups can also participate and receive equal opportunities. So the same like a mother and father in the family. But of course, state is not like that as well. It's not that simple. But sometimes like this policy is not all about economics. Budget is a political statement, right? It will affect whether the public will vote them again in the next 4 years or not.
To understand why our MPs get so fired up by the budget, let's look at where it all starts. The Federal Constitution. Article 104, Clause 3 states that no monies shall be withdrawn from the Consolidated Fund except in the manner provided by federal law. The Constitution puts so much emphasis on protecting the people's money that it has mandated parliamentary approval before almost any expenditure can be made by the government. So with such stringent provisions, how does the government go about administering billions of ringgit in federal funds every single year through Parliament? It starts with the formulation, or drafting, of the federal budget, when the Ministry of Finance takes a look at the books and works with line ministries to figure out what kind of funding they need for the next year. After that, the budget enters the consultation stage to collect public feedback. Once October rolls around, the MOF would then table the draft budget in Parliament to be debated, passed, and eventually implemented. So how do you make sure that everyone gets their fair share? Simply put, these decisions are largely dictated by 2 elements, revenue and expenditure. How much money the government makes and how much money it spends. Just like any other budget, you want to make sure that you don't spend more than you earn. But is there such a thing as a balanced federal budget? The country's revenue can come from many different sources: taxes, investors, exports, etc. But the government also has things that it needs to pay for: civil service salaries, public facilities, and of course, just like the rest of us, loans. As of 2021, the Malaysian government spends about 12% of its expenditures just to service the country's debt. This is where it can get tricky, because the government has just enough revenue to cover its own operating expenditures, and the rest is usually borrowed. Hence, the scarcity of these funds and resources could turn budgeting into some nasty business. So it goes beyond just making sure everyone gets their fair share. It's also about safeguarding the country's financial security while making sure that the well-being of the rakyat is taken care of. Ideally. The key here is the approval stage of the budget process, because that's where Parliament, and by extension our voice as the rakyat, comes in.
There will be 2 levels of debate. The first debate is called policy debate. That's where all the, the big major policies that this budget would like to achieve will be discussed. I think last year, for example, there's a lot of discussions on whether JASA need to be funded or not. And here, actually, if say, for example, if there would be a vote of no confidence, right? If you want to reject the budget, that at this level that usually happen. Last year, that's something that the opposition tried to do, to actually reject the budget at the policy level. That after the policy level is completed, so everyone agree. So there's a vote there.
Ahli-ahli yang bersetuju kata bersetuju. Ahli-ahli yang tidak bersetuju kata tidak. Lebih suara yang bersetuju.
And as 222 members of parliament representing the people who voted for them, they are compelled to exercise the power of the position to ensure that the drafted budget is not only justifiable, but also beneficial to their constituents. 32.7 million people is a lot of people. That's why it's so important for an MP to represent and uphold our voices. Depending on the outcome, allocations can mean more than just funding to some parties. It promises development and encourages growth. So, this process is democracy.
We can always, as citizen, we can also, influence the way the government do their budget. But at the end of the day, it needs parliamentary approval for things to happen.
Budget season is a high-pressure time for both the ruling party and the opposition, considering that it isn't just the stakeholders at stake, but it's also a matter of securing political support. And this isn't just a Malaysian problem. The 535 members of US Congress have also found it hard deciding on bills, sometimes even leading to a government shutdown. In times of need like the COVID-19 pandemic, this lengthy process of parliamentary discussions can feel inefficient, especially if it means the delay of potentially life-saving support, which could include everything from cash handouts and hospital beds, right down to the salaries of our frontliners. Throughout 2021, however, we saw some attempts to mitigate the political noise, like the declaration of emergency and the recent Memorandum of Understanding. While this could be seen as a sensible way to get the right resources to where they're needed as soon as possible, is skipping these checks and balances really a good idea?
Speeding things up is not the solution. The solution is to have a better system of oversight and scrutiny to the budget. In other countries, they have a parliamentary select committees for budget. What happened is this parliamentary select committee will have more time to scrutinize the budget. New Zealand has that Impress Supply Act. What happened in New Zealand is you will approve this part of the budget and Parliament can continue debating until long after that, then will be passed. I mean, the opposition does not always come from that perspective that they want to make you fall or make you, give up your power. But they also think about, hey, maybe there are spendings that you need to prioritize. Are we going to have the budget that continue to have that spending, or let's prioritize this thing? For example, let's increase instead the hospital capacity. So how should we do it? This kind of discussion needs to happen while addressing current needs. Is also very important for the government to be able to project what would be the implications of current spending while we need it for our future the public financial health.
The implications of these bills getting passed in Parliament inevitably falls to us, the Malaysian people. We're the ones who have to deal with it in our daily lives. And we have no direct legislative power in the parliamentary process beyond voting for an MP that we can maybe trust. Because of this, it can be hard to believe that the rakyat actually plays a role here. But it's important to remember that checks and balances shouldn't just be limited to the policy-making level. We have a right to get involved and voice our demands too. Which then raises the question, how much can we actually do as everyday citizens? And how can the existing mechanisms for participation be made better?
I think one, of course, should come from the government as well. Like the government has to have a better way of generating input from the public. One way of doing it is publish white paper, publish a very specific question on what is it the input that you want from the public, right? Otherwise, the public will send whatever the wish list, right? It's like a Santa Claus coming to town and then, okay, what do you want? People can jump in on sort of things. But if the participation mechanism is made clear, and these are the inputs that the government wants, I think that would be better. And secondly, I think on the public side there is a need to, I think what we call is budget literacy. You need to know more about how it is, because it's been seen as it's just an economist or technocratic people can influence the budget. But actually citizens like us can do too. but it needs a more informed citizens. And I think social media helps making that happen. And that's really an opportunity for like democracy to flourish, make the citizen become more informed so that the public can have a better way of involving themselves in the policy-making process.
In short, there is no right allocation of society's resources. Instead, we should be focusing on whether the budget actually reflects our society's priorities, that is ultimately working towards equal opportunities and the welfare of the most vulnerable among us. The road to inclusive public participation may require a long-term overhaul, but until we get there, voting isn't the only way for us to exercise our democratic rights. Despite the chaos, public platforms like social media have become a catalyst in the push for reform and accountability, even amounting to historic policy changes in recent years, proving that power also lies in the people, in you and me. And empowerment doesn't always have to come from a crash course in political science or economics. It can also come from reading the news, being informed, and really listening to the communities around you. It can even come from the expression of art. The budget is not just for the politicians and economists, so we need to be critical of who gets to speak for us. So yes, use your vote, but also know your representatives. Write to them, ask questions, and most importantly, pay attention. Politics and keluarga Malaysia aside, much like making a household budget, the head of the household must take into account the needs of each family member to ensure that no matter what, nobody is left out. Voting is the easiest way for you to participate in a democratic society. So if you haven't yet, make sure you get yourself registered to vote at mysbidaftar.sbr.gov.my.